So I'm sure I can ask someone on the Lightroom team how many individual tools there are in the app, or I can just count them for myself. But the point is that there are a lot of them. And if you're like me, it's understandable if you've developed a repertoire of tools and workflows that you pull from for your photo editing. However, every now and then I edit a photo that causes me to remember some of the other nooks and crannies within Lightroom, each of which helps make my edit that much stronger. So in this video, I'm going to share some of the edit tools that I often overlook and why they're worth adding to your own bag of tricks. All right, let's dive in. Okay, so here we are in Lightroom Desktop, and let's just look at the photo first. So, of course, this is the famous Multnomah Falls in Oregon, just outside of Portland. If we look at the EXIF information, it was taken with my Sony a7R Mark II and the Zeiss Bodice 18mm f2.8 prime lens. I love this lens. If we look at the capture date, though, this is fun. I didn't realize this, but this was taken just over 10 years ago. So we were towards the end of January 2026, and I took this just a few days into January 2016. All right. So when I look at this photo, this is unedited, and the first thing that kind of jumps at me is this is simply the fact of the reality where I was standing and the focal length of the lens that I was using introduces this kind of distortion where you can see, do you see the way the bridge here, I think this is called the Benson Bridge, if I remember correctly, the way it's kind of angled oddly, and it's also kind of, it looks like it's bending backwards. Same thing with the waterfall itself. It looks like this waterfall, just everything looks like it's leaning backwards. And that is just a product of me kind of standing lower compared to the subject, shooting upward, and also using an ultra wide focal length. And usually one of the first things I do is I'll go to the edit stack here. I'll go all the way to the bottom, and I will ensure that the lens correction profile is enabled. So I'll click this, and as long as we are able to detect the lens and we have a profile for it, we will apply it. So watch if I toggle this. Do you see what it does is it's not necessarily fixing for the vertical distortion, but it is fixing the kind of optical distortion where the frame is bowing out from the center. So watch, when I let go, you see the way everything kind of snaps in, but then it kind of pops out in the middle with that barrel distortion. This is very common with ultra wide lenses. Now, fortunately, we were able to fix it, and you can also refine the correction here with distortion. So if I bring it to the left, it's very subtle, but do you see that here? You can control if you want to basically restore the distortion, or you can overcorrect for it. And actually, I like overcorrecting for this here. I'm going to bring this here because what it's doing is it's making these lines even straighter. But we still have this kind of vertical issue to deal with. And this is where one of the tools that I often forget about comes into play. And it might be something that you never have seen, because if we go to the crop panel here, by default, this geometry section, if I remember correctly, the default state is geometry is hidden. You might not realize to expand it. And not only that, but if you do expand it, there is this sub panel here called transform, which is also hidden by default, or not hidden, but collapsed. And so I highly recommend expanding both geometry and transform, because there are a bunch of really helpful sliders here, especially vertical, distortion, and horizontal. Now, distortion would come into play if you were using a lens and we didn't have a lens correction profile, or you just wanted to further accentuate the distortion correction here. In my case here, I don't need to do that, so I'm not going to touch that. But here's where vertical comes into play really helpfully, because watch, if I take this slider here and I drag it to the left and to the right, you can see how the image is kind of moving forward and backwards. And so I mentioned how the image looks like, I can over accentuate here. It looks like the image is leaning back based on the focal length that I was using. And so what I'm going to do is actually drag it to the left here until it looks like what I'm looking at are the vertical lines of the bridge, but also the waterfall. Like this, especially this waterfall, and also the one behind it. I want to make sure that it looks straight. So something like this looks good right around there. And watch, if we toggle the mute, you see how the waterfall, it really becomes apparent when you toggle the before and the after, where here it looks straighter. The other thing I'm going to do is rotate. Now I could use this rotate slider, but I prefer just putting the cursor here and rotating counterclockwise right around there. Looks good. Now you can see again, if we toggle, it really looks like, wow, okay, that's a big difference. Now, there's one last thing that we need to do because using this vertical slider, same thing with the horizontal slider, came at the expense of the original composition. And so you can either manually crop in, because I assume you don't want to have this transparent area in your composition, or you can just click on this constrain crop checkbox here, and Lightroom will automatically constrain to valid pixels. And looking at this some more, I'm going to rotate just a little bit more. So something like that. Now I'm looking at the people. I want the people to look like they are standing straight up and down, and that's looking good now over here. And that actually leads me to another tool. It's a newer tool. Like geometry has been in Lightroom for a very long time. This tool has been in Lightroom for about less than a year, actually. But it's something that I forget to use because I often use another tool instead. And so what I'm talking about is, again, we're speaking of the people. If I go to remove, usually what I would do is I would just use this Gen Remove brush and make my selection. But actually, we have this distracting people removal tool, which makes it a lot easier. It's not always 100% perfect, but all you need to do is expand this over here, and you can see that Lightroom will automatically detect what it thinks are distracting people. I'll go ahead and click on remove, and it does a fantastic job. You can see here that it basically got rid of these people. And if I click here, I can go through these different variations. It's using Gen Remove, and actually this variation looks even better. So we get 3 variations from Firefly. And so we can really select which of these are good. And actually that first one is good. Let me look at the third one. No, the third one brings people back. So that's good right there. But I mentioned how it's not perfect because there's still that person there. Fortunately, all I need to do is go back to the remove tool here and I'm just going to make a spot right there and then click on remove. And there we go. If I toggle the people removal, those are the original people that were there. It looks like they were never there. So I love this. And so now we can actually go ahead, now that we've kind of dialed in the composition and gotten rid of the distractions, we can make our edits. So if I go over here to the edit stack, pretty much all the time, these are the tools that I always use, so I don't forget these. One of the things I will do is I'll click on auto to see what the changes are here by manipulating the actual sliders, and then I'll undo it and I'll apply an adaptive color profile. And in this case here, even though it looks a lot darker, I prefer what it did because I have this amount slider. I can drag this down right around here. And the nice thing is that I have still full control of my sliders, whereas with auto, it makes material edits to these sliders. So let's go ahead, let's select the white balance dropper, and let's target something gray like this. And basically the custom white balance is pretty faithful to the camera auto white balance, which is good. Let's go up here. I'm gonna open up the exposure just a bit. I'm going to open up shadows just a bit. And that's the thing with the adaptive color profile, I don't have to make as strong of an edit as I would with the auto button. Both of them are great. Like, don't get me wrong, I use both, but I'll usually try both of them on the same image, and I'll go with whichever one I think gives me the best starting point. Now I'm going to go ahead and apply an S-curve so that I can get some contrast. So something like this right around here. Let's boost the highlights. Now, I'm seeing the highlights, especially here, getting really, really punchy. I'll take care of that with masks, but for now, what I'm doing is I'm okay with just letting the rest of the image get a little bit brighter. Let's drop those midtones a bit. So something like that looks good. And then let's add a little bit of gray into the black point. So something like that looks good. Then let's take the refine saturation slider here, bring it halfway down. Again, every time you make a point color adjustment, it does add a bit of a color boost. So this slider helps you dial that back. And let's see what the effect of that is. Yep, really nice there. All right, so I mentioned before how this area here is a bit punchy, and I do want to dial it back. So the easiest way for me to do that is to go to the masking panel here. I'm going to select a radial gradient, and I'm just going to make a nice big selection like this, because I only want to focus on the highlights of this area. I'm not as concerned about this stuff over here. And I'm going to tell you why in a few minutes. Now, if I drop the highlight slider with this mask, the problem is that it's affecting the highlights of everything in that radial gradient. But I don't want it to affect the bridge. I really just want it to affect the brightest parts of this selection. And that's where intersect comes in. Now, intersect is something that I don't forget about, but it's something that I don't often have a use for. And if you don't know what that is, I've got a video that I'll link to at the end of this one. It's super important. This is one of the most powerful tools for masking. So what intersect allows me to do is make a selection within a selection. So you can see I've got my radial gradient. This is my selection, basically everything that has this color overlay. But I want to make another selection within this, specifically the brightest parts of the photo. And that is where intersect comes in, because what I can do is I can go to this try dot over here, and I can go to intersect with mask using, and now I have all of the other masking tools to make a sub selection. So I have to know, well, which tool will be most effective here? Well, I know that luminance range. I said I want to select the brightest thing. That's what luminance range is for. And so all I need to do is click on this bright area. Let's turn on the show overlay switch. And now you can see, watch, as I take this bumper and I drag it to the right, it's removing the dark areas. So it's only selecting the brightest parts of the image. So something right around here. And the bridge is not selected. And so let's turn that overlay switch off. And now I can take this highlight slider and the exposure slider. I'm going to drop it down just a tiny bit. So something, you don't want to go too far because then your highlights will start to kind of look muddy. So let's just drop it tiny bit. See the highlights here. So something like that looks good. Because watch, let's toggle this mask. You see how it just gets really blown out. And so we're recovering some of that highlight detail, which I think looks really good. Let's go ahead and rename this mask. Always important. I'll call this Snow Highlight Recovery. And then another tool that I often forget about. And because I use masking so much, this is something that it always kind of makes me shake my head. And that's this amount slider. So this amount slider will be available with every mask that you create. And it allows you to basically dial in the strength of the mask. It's kind of like an opacity slider. So if I bring this to the left, it's effectively the mask being turned off, but I can also double down and bring it to 200, which I don't want. But I do want to kind of dial this back a bit. So restoring some of that highlight information right around there looks good. And so it's important to remember not just these kind of top level tools, but all of the little settings beneath those tools, because that'll make your edits that much more powerful. And now that I'm looking at this photo, remember how I mentioned that I'm not as worried about kind of the snow and stuff over here? That's because this whole area here is pretty much, I would say, dead space. It really doesn't lend itself to the photo other than allowing me to put the bridge more on the right third of the frame. But still, I don't think it's very helpful. So I'm going to go to the crop mode here again, and I'm going to change the aspect to 1:1. This is something I haven't forgotten. It's just something I want to do here. So let's position this right around here. I'll press E to commit, and I want to move it a little bit more. So back and press C over here, and I might see what it looks like more in the center. That actually looks good. I like that. Let's just refine it a little bit. Okay, cool. I really like this. This looks better to me, and we don't have as much of that wasted space on the left of the frame. Now, of course, there are a few other things we can do, like adjust color calibration by increasing the blue primary saturation slider and the green primary saturation slider. Let's add some global texture. I'm okay with that here. Normally, I'll apply texture locally, same thing with clarity. But what I also want to do here is add a little bit of a color grade treatment. Now, I don't forget about color grading. Like, I remember all about color grading. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use these 1-up views. You could use this 3-up view, but I find working on each individual tonal region separately a lot easier because we have these sliders here. And so I'll start with the hue of the shadows. So I'm going to move this slider to about a blue here. And then let's increase the saturation. So not too far, something like this looks good. But the slider that I often forget about is right over here. It's this luminance slider. And what this will do is it will either brighten or darken the shadow area. And if I darken it, obviously makes things more contrasty, but it also makes that color grade harder to see. And so if I increase it though, do you see kind of that color grade becomes more apparent? And especially if I increase the saturation, you start to see that more. And I'm going to accentuate that by going to the midtones. This time I'm going to use more of a greenish teal. So something like this. I'm going to increase the saturation there. And I'm also going to increase luminance. Again, this is a slider I totally forget about, even though it's right over here. With that said, you might not even see these with the one-up view because you might have this disclosure triangle hidden. So I highly recommend expanding that. But just like before, you can see how as I increase luminance, yes, the midtones get brighter, but you start to see more of that teal, which I like. And then lastly, I'm going to go to the highlights here. This, I'm going to add a very, very soft, warm saturation boost to the highlights, something like this. And let's see with the luminance here. So right here looks good. Let's see what all of the color grade effects have on this image. Yeah, this looks great. And it's all because of this luminance slider, which I admit I forget about all the time. Now, the last thing I want to do is kind of draw the eye over here. This is obviously the brightest part of the photo. And so I'm going to darken these two parts of the image. I'm going to do that by going to masking here. I'm going to create a new mask, and I'm going to use a linear gradient, and I'm going to make a selection kind of like this. So something like that. And then I'm going to add to it another linear gradient, and I'm going to kind of crisscross them. So like this. And so you can even see right here the shape of the mask. And so what this allows me to do is here I'm going to darken those areas a bit. Let's drop the shadows a bit. It also is kind of negating a bit of the what we just did in the color grading with the luminance slider, but that's okay here. But I do want to bring back some of the brightness in the waterfall itself. So to do that, I'm going to select subtract over here, and I'm going to use a brush, and I'm going to bring the flow down to about 50 and the density down to about 50. And it'll allow me to very slowly kind of paint in more of the highlights that we darkened using this linear gradient combination here. So right around here, let's see what this looks like. Yeah, you see how it's very subtle, but it brings some of that back. Let's go ahead and rename this, and we'll call this custom vignette because that's basically what it is. And then we can wrap things up with sharpening. So with sharpening, it's pretty straightforward. I take the radius slider, bring it to 0.5, so that kind of minimizes how far sharpening is applied to each hard edge. And then I also increase detail to 100, which will apply sharpening to all fine edges as well as large edges. Then let's go ahead and press and hold on the Option or Alt key while dragging on the amount slider. And so I'm looking, you can zoom in. Also, I recommend zooming into 100% and looking at an area that should be sharp. Let's just make sure it is not over sharp. So right around there. Then we can zoom out. Same thing, press and hold on the Option or Alt key while dragging on the masking slider, which will remove sharpening from areas where it really has no business being applied, like these smooth areas. So right around here looks good. So here, if we press and hold on the backslash key, that is our original photo without the distortion corrections. And it just, to me, this looks like a much more polished photo. And a big part of that has to do with the tools that I forget about that are available in Lightroom. And so I think you'd agree, right? Like those tools that I know I forget about, like geometry and the luminance slider in color grading, they can have a big impact on your photo, which is why I think it's important to, you don't have to use them all the time, but at least remember that they're there so that when you need them, you know exactly where to pull them from. If there are tools, though, that you forget about that are different, let me know in the comments. I'm definitely curious to hear about them. Now, of course, this is just a small part of Lightroom. If you want to learn everything there is to know about Lightroom desktop and mobile and web, please check out my course called Lightroom Everywhere. I've got a link to that in the description below. I also mentioned how I have a video all about intersect masking. Please watch it. Do not skip it. Or you can see what YouTube thinks you might like over here. As always, a thumbs up is greatly appreciated, as is clicking on the subscribe button and the bell icon to get notified of all future videos. Thanks a lot, everyone.